Good morning and welcome to our fourth month of strategic questions for nonprofits, where this year, every month, we're tackling a different section of an NPO. We've dissected into, I think, 10 different sectors, and we are looking at the strategic questions. So a little bit about us. We are EM Solutions, and we provide strategic consulting, coaching, accompaniment and advisory to both business and nonprofit sector, which means we help you with all the thinking stuff. And we're very, very focused on a couple of things. Sustainability, profitability are our key things. And with that, we look at how to find various ways to fund through diversification and income generation projects. Now that sounds all very, very fancy, and we took like 6 months to write that, but ultimately Michelle and myself have come up with some clever ways to create alternate income sources for nonprofits other than standing on the side of the street with a tin can or going house to house or hoping that some corporate will then fund you through their CSI money. So if you're interested in chatting to us about our income creation projects or any of the stuff that Michelle's going to talk to us about today, then please, we will give you links to us and our website a bit later in the presentation. So a little bit about us too. That's me. I'm the tall one, Bruce Wade, and I'm involved in the entrepreneurial side of things. I run a lot of the entrepreneur training and the programming and the coaching. And at the moment, I'm working with a number of speakers around the world, creating a profitable mindset for the speaking industry. And I am in the final stages of my first draft of the book called Crowd Control, which speaks to that specifically. I just cracked the 20,000 word mark on my book this morning during my writing spell. So things are moving on there. Michelle, on the other hand, is the numbers person. Her happy space is Excel. And looking at strategy and numbers and working with nonprofit. Michelle comes with many, many years of nonprofit and accounting experience from various jobs, started her own business, and then we merged our businesses together a number of years ago to create EM Solutions. And we have now able to give you a double-sided strategy from an entrepreneurial and a nonprofit side. So that's why what we offer is quite unique in the market. So Michelle this morning is going to take us through the fourth P of what we've been looking at. So we've been looking at the 3 Ps of plausibility. We've looking at what is the problem you're solving, who are the people you're working with, and what product offering or services you have. And we jump out of plausibility and we now focus into the purpose. So Michelle, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through the purpose of a nonprofit, and more importantly, the purpose of your nonprofit.
Cool. Thank you very much, Bruce. So I wanted to ask a question, and I'm going to unpack it a little bit, and then open up the floor for a bit of discussion. The question is, why was your organization created? And if you've newly joined, you may not know. And there may be so much history and so much water under the bridge that you kind of go, well, why? Why do we want to know? What is the purpose of that question? But it is quite an interesting starting point to understand why organizations are created in the first place. And there are many varied reasons for that. And I've just put some thoughts down on the sheet, and I'll just go through them just sort of as a points for myself to be able to give you some ideas, because it's often not as straightforward as you think it is. And it has an impact on how the organization is run, the culture of the organization, the background, the way you do things can come from the reason that your organization was created. The most common one is that there is a community or personal need, and the community get together and they say, look, we need to do this. We need to solve this. You know, we've spoken already in the last few months about the people and purpose, people and product and all that kind of thing, but it stems from a need. So you have to say, well, what problem is our organization solving? So there's somebody's identified a need, and there's a community who's come together. Mary, I know you're on the call here, and there's a specific personal need that has given rise to the organization that you feel so passionate about. And that may not be the reason that it started, I'm just assuming, but there is a definite personal experience. And that leads me to the second one. There's some kind of passion that somebody is really committed to, or they have a skill set, or they have a personal experience. I'm just thinking of one of the people who frequently joins us, particularly last year in our calls, Lily, who has a dance-related organization. Now that stems from her personal passion, and then she's seen that there is a need in that relationship, need in that area, and she has such a heartfelt connection to it that she started an organization. Other people may say, look, I have a particular skill set that meets the need. That is why it is important to start a nonprofit organization. One of my clients, who is now quite a significant international organization, actually started as an offshoot of another nonprofit. They started as a project, and then when that organization was funded by Dutch money and the Dutch government pulled out of their country, so that whole parent organization closed down, it was an opportunity for the project to then actually establish itself as its own organization. So it didn't stem from a particular person's passion, but it was an outworking of the other organization. Unfortunately, I see a lot on Facebook of people starting organizations in order to receive employment or income. It's almost like, I don't have a job, I must start an NGO and I will receive funding. And then there's a big question. I've got my NGO now, how do I get funding? Which is not really the best place to start. It's a bit of a backwards way around it, because, as you've been in the sector for long enough, you know that funding is a very difficult thing to achieve, and takes a lot of passion and hard work. And starting an organization is not a solution to unemployment, your personal unemployment. But that is often the reason that the organization was created in the first place. The other one that I see is that people are volunteering at a particular organization. They are interested in what that organization does, and they then feel that they can do it better. Maybe they see gaps that the organization they're volunteering at hasn't really filled, and so they start their own organization. And that a little bit leads me onto ego. There can be a situation where somebody feels that they can do it better, that they have better knowledge or skill, or they feel that they have something to offer to the nonprofit sector, that they have something that they bring to the party, and so they start an organization out of their ego. Other ones are international pressure and global objectives. So, we have the sustainability goals, these broad-based global goals that have been set, and a lot of organizations start out of a need to achieve those objectives, either by the country or by individuals within the country who are who connect with that specific goal. And part of that is like the Global Fund, for example, in the States. They have this global mandate to eliminate HIV. And so where there is no organization in a particular area or a particular country, there is a support system from that international donor to be able to start an organization to meet that particular need on that international stage and on that international objective. So that's just to get you to think back behind the scenes. We often, talk about what is our mission and our vision, which is the next sort of kind of question. But I wanted you to just to ponder why your organization was created in the first place. What was the underlying thinking that happened there? The next question I have for you is, should your organization even be a non-profit organization? I have had many conversations with people who say, I want to start a non-profit. Me and my buddy want to do this and that and the other thing. And you start to unpack and say, well, why? Why do you want to? Why a non-profit? And mostly it's because they have some kind of passion's the right word, really, for something that has a social element to it. So they want to make a difference in people's lives. They want to do that in a way that they think needs to be a non-profit. And often I end up saying to them, well, actually, you could be a company. There is an opportunity here for you to charge for the services you offer. You have a skill set. You have a process, a methodology, a way of thinking, a product that can be packaged in a way that provides support to the nonprofit sector or to the demographic that you want to work with, but you yourselves don't need to actually be a nonprofit. Frequently, somebody is a sort of founder, has a big idea, and then you say to them, well, actually, you've got to find 3 other people, or at least 2 other people to be on your board who are going to tell you what to do and who are going to run the organization strategically. It's never going to be your baby. And that is often a problem where a person has this passion and it becomes their baby and they don't want to relinquish control. And so you then say, well, maybe you should actually be a company. Or this weird thing which we don't have a real legal structure for in South Africa is a social enterprise. And often we have companies who pretend to be social enterprises by doing a little bit of good on the side or donating or, having a CSI department. But to me, a true social enterprise is where what you're doing which has a social impact is a significant part of your business. It's why you do things. It's how you do things. And it's not just lip service to the social sector. And then obviously there's a non-profit organization. So it's just a question, I see popping up so many people who are registering new organizations all the time. And my question is, should you even be a non-profit organization? So when we talk about non-profits, there are 3 types of legal structures. And we're going to unpack this a lot more as we go into the rest of the discussion. There is a voluntary association, a non-profit company, and a trust. So when you are considering what kind of non-profit organization structure you should be, there are some areas that I would look at in terms of considerations. The first being governance. How is it structured? Who does it fall under? Where are your legalities and so forth? What do you need to be compliant with? And then how is the management and assets structured? These are the things that I would look at when looking at a legal structure for a non-profit organization. So just unpacking a voluntary association, which is the most common one. I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it's about 90% of non-profit organizations are registered as voluntary associations. And it's essentially a contract between typically a community. It's a contract between the members of that community who form the members of the organization and the management committee who then is tasked with running that organization. So it is literally a piece of paper. It's the same as any other contract where you state the obligations of each party and the rules that they have to follow. There's certain clauses that you should put in there which make it into a non-profit organization contract, a voluntary association contract, but you can edit that and there's no limit on what can go into that contract. And by virtue of that, there's no governing law. And so we were talking earlier on, when I think some of you were still joining us, about the names of things, particularly referencing all nations and saying there are other organizations with those, with all other nations, or in some context. There's no checking body that says, okay, you can or cannot name your organization this, because it is a name that you determine in your contract and you agree as a community, as a group of members, that you want to call your organization. In terms of compliance, is SARS for income tax, PAYE if you have staff, etc., etc. The non-profit directorate, and then you need at least an accounting officer's report in terms of the financial regulation. Most organizations, because it's not registered anywhere, it's just a document, kind of feel like they come into existence when they register with the non-profit directorate as a non-profit organization. And that's not the case. The minute that the founding management committee signs on the dotted line on that contract, the organization exists and you can go to the bank and get a bank account and so forth. But their minimum level of compliance is with the non-profit directorate in terms of governance, financial and narrative reporting that has to happen. So it's quite easy from a setup and compliance point of view. It's literally this document and the registrations that you feel are appropriate and complying with those. Management committee is just changed according to the Constitution, how you have set up the way of changing that, and most people who've registered with the non-profit directorate will need to notify the non-profit directorate. And my sense, though any organization can choose any one of these legal structures, my sense is this one is the most appropriate for a community-centric organization with local funding, and particularly good when it comes to a member-based organization. Your non-profit company is becoming more attractive because registering with the CIPC, which is the Companies and Intellectual Property Commission, is quick. It's not free, like a voluntary association is free to set up, but it is much quicker than the non-profit directorate in terms of creating some registration and some authority over it. Instead of a constitution, which is the contract, it has a Memorandum of Incorporation. And the Memorandum of Incorporation has to include the certain clauses that come from the Non-Profit Act to make it into a non-profit company. And it's a specific vehicle as opposed to a company because it has no shareholders. A normal company will have shareholders who own the company, but CIPC registered this with no shareholders. It is governed by the Companies Act. So all of the requirements within the Companies Act are applicable to the non-profit company, as well as a few additional clauses that are specific to non-profit companies that sit in the Companies Act. So you have to be familiar with the Companies Act if you are looking at a non-profit company as well, to make sure that you don't contravene it in any way. The governance is through the board of directors who are appointed by themselves initially and then through a recruitment process going forward. Compliance is more onerous because you need to comply with CIPC, who have an annual return which costs money to submit, and so there's, as I say, it's more costly. as well as SARS and the NPO Directorate, the same as the Voluntary Association. When it comes to whether you need an audit or an accounting officer, the Companies Act determines something called a public interest score. And if your public interest score is more than 100, you are by law required to have an audit. You get a point for every million in assets, a point for every million in debt, etc., etc. So 99.9% of non-profit companies don't require legislatively an audit, though they may just choose to do so, or a donor might insist they have an audit. But it is an element to be aware of, that as a non-profit company, because you fit under the Companies Act, your audit is predetermined by the law and not by a group of people who decide what they want to do. The management and assets, as I said, is the board of directors, which needs to be changed with both the CIPC and NPO Directorate if you're registered there as well. It has international recognition. What's quite important is that the Voluntary Association, because there's no legal act to cover it, and you can say whatever you like in the contract, unless you're registered with the non-profit directorate, there is no assurance but the international stage of how your organization is run. Whereas with a non-profit company, because you fall under this legal structure, the international world understands what a company is, they understand how this works, they understand the Companies Act, and they recognize the constraints on you as an organization that you need to be, that gives them assurance of good governance. The last one is a trust, which is governed by the trust deed and falls under the Trust Property Control Act. Most of the Trust Property Control Act is not particularly relevant to non-profit trusts, and as you may be aware, you can set up different types of trusts, trusts that are created on your death, trusts that are created during your life. As a family trust is often is a good vehicle for protecting your assets, and then a non-profit trust. This was one of the more common ones, but as with any government department, the High Court is a very long and lengthy process to get anything changed, and so it, from a compliance point of view, becomes more and more difficult. It's governed by a board of trustees who are speaking and acting on behalf of the beneficiaries. With a non-profit company, your board of directors act on behalf of the organization. The trustees are speaking on behalf of the beneficiaries, because you have to clearly define who your beneficiaries are, because the beneficiaries are the ones who receive the value from the trust. You know, if you were a family trust and you put your personal assets into the trust, you may set yourself as a parents up as the trustees and your beneficiaries as your children, so that at the time that you pass away, your assets remain within the trust, and then children reach age of maturity, they then receive the income that trust has generated over their lifetime. So there's a very specific relationship between the trustees as a board and the beneficiaries, and who those beneficiaries are. We did a presentation at the Cape Chamber earlier in this month with another organization called Active Pro, and the beneficiaries, defining who those are, has a significant impact on your BEE status and your access to BEE funds. And so this is something that trustees need to be aware of. Terms of compliance, say same as SARS and the NPO Directorate for income tax and public income tax exemption, and then ensuring that you comply with any mandates of the High Court, and that all the changes to your trustee, changes to your trustees, so forth, is communicated to the High Court. The audit is determined by your trust deed. So if you have an audit stipulated in your trust deed or an accounting officer's report, or whatever level of assurance the trustees at the time of drafting the trust deed determined to put in there. Just so that you are also aware, the Nonprofit Directorate has a sample contract for a voluntary organization, but typically a trust deed is drawn up by a lawyer who understands the intricacies of the Trust Property Control Act and ensures that it is compliant from a legal standpoint. As I said, your Board of Trustees, and the primary purpose for a trust is most often the protection of an asset. So either it might be an endowment fund, somebody has passed away and left a significant amount of money, or even maybe in their lifetime has gifted a significant amount of money to a set of beneficiaries, and then that money is held in trust for those beneficiaries and managed by the trustees, and that those funds are then protected for the benefit of those beneficiaries, or it's an asset, a fixed asset. So a property is the biggest one. Vehicles and that, they depreciate too quickly to be really viable in terms of an asset. Could be a share portfolio instead of physical cash, but there is something that is the starting point when it comes to an organization. I know that a lot of organizations actually have a separate trust for their property, and that the organization itself can be a trust or can be a non-profit company, but then they put their asset into a separate trust. I mean, from a legal point of view, it's not necessary. And sometimes it creates a level of complexity that's unnecessary, but there can be strategic reasons for maintaining an asset in a separate legal entity, and that then is typically a trust where you're protecting the asset. So the question I really have for you then is, are you structured in the best way possible to achieve your purpose? Now, if you're looking at a community organization, what is the best way? Is there a reason that you're structured the way that you are? Is it necessary to change it? For most people, not. Most people, once you understand that this is the way you're structured and why you're structured that way, then you just carry on. I mean, to the outside world, you're a nonprofit. You happen to either have a trust number or a company number. Most of you will have nonprofit numbers as well. But it is also important, especially if you're thinking of starting a new organization, that you consider most carefully how you are structured and the purpose that you are created for, and why those two are connected, and how that can impact on your achievement of your goals. So just to show you just this little one, just to say, if you would like help chatting through your organizational structure, please contact us. We can have a sit down and have a chat. We connected with somebody earlier in the month, who actually has two organizations. The one is a nonprofit company and is registered with all of the SARs and with everything that needs to be registered with. And then they have this voluntary association with the same name that sits on the side. And according to this client, it's for funding. But there's no real need for it to be a separate entity. And so unpacking that, or why there are two, is something that we are working through with this client, and seeing what are the strategic values of having those two. So that's also something that we can chat with you about if you do have some level of confusion around how you are structured. Bruce, do you want to just take us through some of the rest of the slide and then take us on to the how to connect with us?
That's perfect. Yeah. Lovely. Thank you very much, Michelle. Thanks for your wisdom. And I'm glad we've recorded this, because this is a question we get over and over and over and over again. So we will definitely be putting this up as a video on our Facebook page. So if you've missed anything, you are able to get it there. So if you do want to get hold of us for any kind of strategy design for your nonprofit, and that's anything to do with structure or projects or fundraising or where or how or why, then Michelle is your person to chat to. And if you are looking at bridging the gap between fundraising and your expenses, and that gap is sometimes wider than we hope, and then come chat to us. We've got a couple of off-the-shelf products for a income generating project